Guy de Maupassant, in Brittany. The time for travel has come. The time of clear days when one feels an irresistible pull towards new horizons, towards the boundless blue expanses of the sea, where the eye finds rest and thoughts grow quiet, towards the cool, wooded valleys where something unknowable touches the soul as you sit under the evening sky by the roadside on a velvet green slope, gazing at the reflections of the sunset in a puddle of brown, stagnant water at your very feet in a rut carved by the wheels of carts. I am inordinately fond of these wanderings across a world one seems to discover anew, marveling at customs of which one had no inkling. I love my awakened, insatiable curiosity, the new landscapes that delight the eye, the unceasing labor of the mind. Only one thing mars for me the pleasure of exploring unfamiliar places, the reading of guidebooks, written by commercial travelers in the field of knowledge, full of vulgar and perpetually false descriptions, invariably erroneous information, and outright fabrications in their directions, all of them, with the exception of one excellent German guide, might perhaps gratify shopkeepers undertaking pleasure trips by railway and discovering the country with the help of Joanne, but they're the despair of genuine travelers, who walk with a pack on their back and a staff in hand along paths, through ravines and by the seashore. Guidebooks lie, they know nothing, they understand nothing, and they disfigure the most picturesque spots with their pompous and foolish prose. They're only informed about the main highways and are, truly, on a par with the so-called general staff maps, which to this day fail to mark the dams on the Seine, built now almost 30 years ago. And yet, how pleasant it is during a journey to acquaint oneself in advance with the region one is heading for. What a delight to find a book in which some wanderer has sketched his fleeting impressions. It is merely an introduction. It only prepares you for an acquaintance with the country. But sometimes it is something more. When traveling through Algeria and reaching the Lagwad oasis, one must read and reread, daily, hourly, Fromentin's wonderful book of Summer in the Sahara. It opens your eyes, stirs your thoughts, as if illuminating those plains, those mountains, those fiery, uninhabited spaces more brightly. It reveals the very soul of the desert. In France, one finds everywhere corners that are almost unknown and charming. Without aspiring to create a new guidebook, I would merely like, from time to time, to share accounts of brief excursions, of journeys lasting 10 to 15 days, well known to enthusiasts but completely unknown to stay-at-homes. Never to take the main roads, but only the footpaths, to sleep in barns if there is no one nearby, to subsist on bread and water when no other food can be found, to fear neither rain, nor distance, nor long hours of continuous walking. This is what is needed to know a country, to penetrate its very heart, to discover, even near cities so familiar to tourists, 1,000 things one never before suspected. Among the old provinces of France, one of the most curious is Brittany. 10 days are enough to become acquainted with it, to comprehend its character, for every land, like every person, has its own distinct nature. Let us cast a fleeting glance upon it. Let us walk, if only from Vannes to Dardanelles, along the coast, the true Breton coast, deserted and flat, strewn with reefs, where the waves eternally roar, as if answering the whistle of the wind in the moors. The Morbihan, a kind of inland sea, rising and falling with the ocean's tides, spreads out before the harbor of Vannes. One must cross it to reach the open sea. Upon it are many islands, druidical islands, mysterious, as if haunted by phantoms. On these islands are burial mounds, menhirs, and dolmens. All those strange stones once worshipped almost as deities. According to the Bretons, there are as many of these islets as there are days in the year. The Morbihan is a sea full of symbols and superstitions. And herein lies the chief charm of this region. It is the homeland of legends. Ancient beliefs, long dead everywhere else, continue to live in its granite soil. Old tales, too, are preserved here in their entirety, and some peasant will tell you of events that happened 15 centuries ago, as if they occurred yesterday, as if his father or grandfather had witnessed them. There are crypts where the body of the deceased is preserved intact, in the very state in which death seized it, merely drying up because the blood has stopped in the veins. Just so do memories live on eternally in this corner of France. Memories and even the very way of thinking of one's ancestors. I left Vaughan on the very day of my arrival to see the historic castle of Sicinio, and from there proceeded to Lochmariacher, then to Carnac, and further along the coast to Ponela Bay, to Penmarch, to the Raz Point, and to Darnanette. At first, the road wound along the Morbihan. Then it struck out across a boundless moor, crisscrossed by water-filled ditches. Not a dwelling, not a tree, not a soul in sight. The entire expanse was overgrown with gorse, which whistled as it swayed under the onslaught of a fierce wind driving tattered, moaning clouds across the sky. Then I passed through a tiny village where 3 grimy peasants and a girl of about 20, her feet blackened with manure, wandered barefoot. And ahead lay the moor again, desolate, bare, marshy. It stretched all the way to the ocean, whose gray band vanished beyond the horizon, dotted here and there with the white specks of foaming waves. Amid these wild expanses rose ruins, a square castle with towers at its corners, standing solitary between 2 deserts, the sea and the moor. The ancient castle of Sicinio, built in the 13th century, is widely known. It was the birthplace of the great Constable de Richemont, who restored France from English rule. The gates were gone. I stepped into a vast, deserted courtyard where heaps of stone lay where the turrets had collapsed, and, climbing the remnants of staircases, scrambling over torn-down walls, grasping at ivy, at half-dislodged granite blocks, at anything within reach, I finally reached the top of a tower and began to survey Brittany. Directly before me, beyond an uncultivated plain, stretched the ocean, murky and roaring under a gloomy sky, while all around lay the moor. Further, to the right, the Morbihan was visible with its indented shores, and beyond that, the faint white strip of land was Vaughan, illuminated by a ray of sunlight that had somehow pierced through the clouds. And there, in the farthest distance, loomed the great headland, Quiberon, and everything was so sorrowful, melancholic, and dreary. The wind wept as it swept across these bleak expanses. I was truly in a land of phantoms. Within these walls, among the low, whistling gorse, in these pits of stagnant water, I felt. Legends lingered. The next day, I passed through St. Gildas, where the memory of a Baylard wanders like a shadow. In Port Navalot, a sailor ferrying me across the strait told me of his father, a Chouin, his elder brother, a Chouin, and his uncle, a priest, also a Chouin. All 3 had perished. His outstretched hand pointed toward Quiberon. In Lochmariacher, I set foot on the land of the Druids. A Breton showed me the Table de César, a monstrous granite structure supported by stone giants. Then he spoke to me of Caesar as though he were some old man he had known personally. continuing my journey along the coast between the moor and the ocean. By evening, I saw from the top of a mound the stone-strewn fields of Carnac before me. They seemed alive, these stones arrayed in endless rows, some colossal, others tiny, square, oblong, flat, resembling gaunt or pot-bellied bodies. If you stared at them long enough, it began to seem as though they stirred, leaned, lived a life of their own. It was easy to get lost among them. At times, a wall divided this granite crowd. You would walk around it, only to encounter the same strange figures again, now resembling rows of trees lining avenues, now soldiers in formation, now terrifying phantoms. Your heart begins to beat faster. Excitement grips you. Your mind transports you to the past, and you surrender to superstitious moods. I stood motionless, amazed and enchanted, when suddenly I was startled by an unexpected noise behind me and instantly turned around. Before me stood an old man, dressed entirely in black, with a book under his arm. Bowing politely, he said, "So you are viewing our Carnac, sir?" I share my admiration with him and confessed that he had startled me. He continued, "Here, sir, the very atmosphere is steeped in superstition, and everyone is afraid without knowing of what. 4 or 5 years now, I have been excavating beneath these stones. Almost everyone holds some secret, and at times it seems to me as if they all have a soul. When I find myself on the boulevards of Paris, I chuckle at my own simplicity, but no sooner do I return to Carnac than I become a believer once more. I believe unconsciously. I have no definite religion, but I accept them all." And, striking his foot upon the ground, he added, "Religion possesses this land. Never jest with bygone beliefs, for nothing ever dies. We are here among the Druids, sir, so let us respect their faith." The sun had already vanished into the sea, but the sky still held a crimson glow, bathing the huge stones around us in a bloody light. The old man smiled. "Imagine, these ancient superstitions are so potent here that I myself had a vision on this very spot. More than that, a real ghost appeared to me. Right here, on this dolmen, one evening at this very hour, I clearly saw the sorceress Ceridwen brewing her magic potion." I interrupted him to ask who the sorceress Ceridwen was. He was astonished. "What? You have not heard of the wife of the god who, and the mother of the Corrigan?" "No, I confess I have not. If it is a legend, please tell it to me." I sat down beside him on a menhir. He began his tale. The god who, the father of the Druids, had a wife, the sorceress Ceridwen. She bore him 3 children, Morvran, Crearwy, the most beautiful of maidens, and a Fagdu, the most hideous of creatures. Driven by a mother's love, Ceridwen wished to endow her ugly son with some gift and decided to brew him a potion that would grant the power of prophecy. The potion was to brew for a full year. The sorceress set a blind man named Morda and a dwarf named Gwayan to guard the cauldron. As the year drew to a close, the watchers grew careless. A few precious drops were spilled, and 3 of them fell upon the dwarf's finger. He instinctively licked his finger and immediately gained the gift of foresight. The cauldron straightway shattered, and Ceridwen, appearing, rushed at Gwayan, who fled for his life. The chase was nearly upon him, and to run faster, he turned himself into a hare, but the sorceress at once became a greyhound and sped after him. She almost caught him by a river, but he, turning into a fish, dove into the water. Then a huge otter appeared, which nearly overtook him, so that he only escaped by transforming into a bird. But from the heavens swooped a great hawk, spreading its wings, opening its beak. It was none other than Ceridwen, and Gwion, trembling with fear, fell as a grain of wheat onto a pile of corn. Then a large black hen ran up and swallowed him. The avenged Ceridwen was resting when she suddenly felt that she would again become a mother. The grain sprouted within her, and a child was born, whom was set adrift on the water in a reed cradle. But the infant, saved by the son of King Gwydion, became a genius, a spirit of the moors, a corrigan. Thus all the little fairy creatures, the dwarfs, the wandering spirits that dwell among these stones, are descended from Ceridwen. They say they live underground in little holes and come out in the evenings to frolic in the gorse bushes. Sit here a while longer, sir, among these enchanted monuments. Peer more intently at some dolmen lying on the ground, and soon you will hear a rustling, see the stones stir, and tremble with fear upon discerning the face of a corrigan looking at you from under a granite block, which he has lifted with his head. And now, let us go to dinner. Night fell, moonless, utterly dark, filled with the howling of the wind. Stretching my hands out before me, I walked by feel, stumbling against tall stones. The tale I had heard, this locality, my thoughts, everything had taken on such a supernatural hue that I would not have been the least surprised if some corrigan had suddenly darted under my feet. The next day, I resumed my journey across moors, through hamlets and towns. Loria, Quimperle, so picturesque in its valley setting, and Quimper. From Quimper, the high road runs along the coast, crosses valleys, passes by a gloomy, grass-grown lake, and finally leads to Pont-à-l'Abbé, a small town, the most quintessentially Breton in all of this old-world Brittany that stretches from the Morbihan to the Raz Point. At the entrance to the town stands an old castle with towers, the foot of its walls washed by the waters of a profoundly dismal pond, over which wild birds circle. Here a river begins, up which small craft can travel to the town. Along the narrow streets with their centuries-old houses walk men in enormous broad-brimmed hats, in richly embroidered waistcoats, and in 4 jackets worn one over the other. The top one, the size of a hand, barely covers the shoulder blades, and the bottom one falls almost to the knees. The girls, tall, beautiful, and fresh-faced, wear bodices of thick cloth that cinch their waists like breastplates and so distort the bust that one would never suspect the lush figures of Breton women. On their heads they wear exceedingly strange headdresses. 2 gaily embroidered rosettes at the temples frame the face and hold the hair, which is let down and then gathered at the crown under a peculiar coif, often woven with gold and silver thread. The road leads out once more from this small, forgotten medieval town. It runs through moorland, patchily overgrown with gorse. Here and there, 3 or 4 cows graze by the roadside, always accompanied by a ram. For several days now, you have been pondering the question of why the cows are invariably accompanied by a ram. This question pursues you relentlessly, nags at you, becomes an obsession. You search for someone who could provide an explanation. Finding such a person is not easy, for it can happen that after wandering through villages for a whole week, you meet no one who knows a single word of French. Finally, some parish priest, walking at a measured pace with his breviary in hand, will politely explain to you that this ram is the portion set aside for the wolf. A ram costs less than a cow, and since it can be seized without great danger, the wolf always prefers it. But it often happens that the brave cows form a square around their innocent companion and receive the howling beast, eager for fresh meat, upon their sharp horns. The wolf. Here, you will inevitably be told of that legendary wolf we were all frightened with as children. The white wolf, the great white wolf that every hunter has seen, but which no one has ever shot. You will not encounter him in the mornings. He appears in winter, around 5 o'clock, at sunset, running along the bare ridge of a hill, gliding as a long shadow against the sky, and vanishes. Why has he not been killed to this day? For this reason, though it is merely a conjecture. The substantial hunting breakfasts begin around 1 in the afternoon and conclude by 4. They drink copiously and talk of the white wolf. It is little wonder that, upon rising from the table, the hunters often see him. And is it surprising that they do not kill him? I walked on along the gray, granite-paved road, glistening in the sunlight. On either side stretched a flat plain, sporadically covered with gorse. Gazing at the huge, fallen stones, one involuntarily conjures up memories of the Druids, while the wind, sweeping low, whistles through the thorny thickets. At times, the earth shudders from a dull roar, as if from a distant cannon shot. This means I'm already near Penmarch, where the sea waves crash into resonant caves. Crashing into these chasms, they shake the entire shore, and in stormy weather their thunder is heard even in Quimper. For some time now, a broad band of gray waves has been visible, seeming to loom over this low and barren landscape. Rocks, piles of sharp submerged stones, breaking the waves, thrust their black heads everywhere from the water, surrounded by a necklace of foam and as if slobbering. And further on, right at the water's edge, a few chilled little houses seek shelter behind low heaps of stones from the eternal hurricane of the watery expanse and from the salty spray of the ocean. A tall lighthouse, shuddering on its rocky foundation, thrusts itself into the very thick of the waves, and the keepers recount that sometimes, on rough nights, its high granite pillar sways like a ship. The tower clock crashes face down to the floor, and all objects hanging on the walls are torn loose, fall, and shatter. From the lighthouse to Cantic stretches a fatal line of shipwrecks. Here, as if in ambush, lurks death, terrible sea death, the drowner. No other shore holds greater dangers, inspires greater fears, devours more human lives. In the low fisher-folks' cottages in the dirt, side by side with pigs, huddle an old mother, grown daughters with bare and dirty feet, and sons, the eldest of whom is no more than 30. You will almost never see the father here, rarely the eldest son. Do not ask where they are, for the old woman will silently stretch out her hand towards the raging, swollen sea, forever ready to crash down upon this shore. It is not only the treacherous sea that devours people here. It has an almighty, even more treacherous ally that aids it every night in its gluttonous search for human flesh, alcohol. The fishermen know this. They admit it. When the bottle is full, they say, the submerged rocks are visible, but when the bottle is empty, they can no longer be seen. The coast of Penmarch is dreadful. It must have been here that pirates lured ships astray. Fitting a cow with hobbles so it would limp, they attached a lantern to its horns, suggesting the deceptive idea that another ship was sailing from that direction. And here, a little to the right, is a rock famed after a horrifying drama. The wife of one of the last prefects of Morbihan was sitting on this stone, holding her small daughter on her knees. The sea, a few meters at her feet, seemed calm, harmless, asleep. Suddenly, one of those strange waves known as a rogue wave rose from the depths, crept up silently, swelled its back, crawled onto the cliff, and, like a treacherous villain, carried both away, swallowing them in an instant. Customs officers passing in the distance saw only a pink parasol floating peacefully on the now calm sea, and the tall, bare rock down which water streamed. For a whole year, doctors and lawyers argued, demonstrated, and squabbled, trying to determine which of the two, the mother or the child, swept away by the wave, had died first. They drowned cats with kittens, bitches with puppies, does with leverets, to eliminate all doubt, for upon this depended the question of a large inheritance. The fortune was to pass to one family or the other, depending on whether the death throes ceased later in the tiny body or in the body of the adult woman. Almost opposite this fateful spot rises a granite hill crowned with a crucifix. Such crosses are found at every step in this pious region, where ancient Calvaries are as numerous as the even older dolmens. Yet this crucifix is surmounted by a remarkable bas-relief, depicting in a crude and thus droll manner the Virgin Mary's delivery. A visiting Englishman was so delighted by this naive sculpture that he ordered a canopy to be erected over the monument to protect it from the harsh climate. Further on, the path runs along the shore, an endless shore skirting the entire bay of Audierne. One must ford or swim across two small streams, trudge through deep sand or deposits of dried seaweed, walking always between two deserts, one mobile, the other immobile, between the sea and the moor. Here is Audierne, a small, dreary port. Its only animation comes from the sardine boats arriving and departing. In the morning, before setting off, instead of the usual coffee with milk, you breakfast on small fresh fish, lightly sprinkled with salt, tender and fragrant, true violets of the sea. And you set off for the Point du Raz, this end of the earth, the final point of Europe. You climb higher and higher, and suddenly two seas open before you. To the left, the ocean, to the right, the channel. Here, an unceasing struggle rages. Two currents clash, and the waves, ever menacing, overturn ships, swallowing them like sweets. O waves, how many sinister secrets you know! You make prostrate mothers tremble. On the far projecting headland, there is not a single tree, nothing but low-growing grasses. At its very edge stand two lighthouses, and in the distance others are visible on the rocks. One of them has somehow remained unfinished for 10 years now. The sea's fury destroys the persistent labor of men as fast as they progress. There, opposite, lies the island of Seine, the sacred island, gazing towards the horizon, where beyond the roadstead of Brest its dangerous counterpart rises from the water, the island of Ouessant. To sight Ouessant is to spill one's blood, say the sailors. Ouessant is the most impregnable of all the Breton islands, and sailors approach it with trepidation. The high cape drops away steeply, its shore plunging vertically into the sea where the waves collide. Yet a narrow path skirts it nonetheless. At times it crawls over sloping granite blocks, at others it winds along their crest, no wider than a hand's breadth. Suddenly, a terrible chasm gapes beneath you, its walls black as if ink-stained, echoing with the furious roar of the warring seas raging below in the depths of this abyss nicknamed Hell. Though I stood 100 meters above the sea, the spray reached me, and, leaning over the precipice, I watched this seething of waves, lifted by an incomprehensible fury. This was a veritable hell, undescribed by any poet. And horror seized me at the thought of people cast down there, tossed by the waves, spun in whirlpools, drawn into this tempest between four stone walls, dashed against rocky ledges, seized again by the surf, and spewed forth in boiling, monstrous billows. And I continued on my way, haunted by these images, weary from the gusts of wind lashing the lonely cape. After some 20 minutes, I found myself in a small village. An elderly priest, reading his breviary sheltered by a stone wall, bowed to me. I asked him where I might find lodging for the night. He offered me shelter in his house. An hour later, as we sat together at the threshold of his dwelling, conversing about this dreary, melancholy land, we saw a Breton boy passing by, barefoot, with long, fair hair streaming in the wind. The priest called to him in the local patois, and the lad approached us. Suddenly growing timid, he cast down his eyes and awkwardly dropped his hands. He will recite a spiritual canticle for us from memory, the priest said to me. The boy is endowed with an excellent memory. I believe he will amount to something. And the child began to babble unintelligible words in a plaintive little voice, like small girls reciting memorized fables. He spoke without pausing for periods or commas, slurring his syllables as if the whole passage were one endless word, stopped for a moment to catch his breath, and again took up his rapid, indistinct muttering. Suddenly he fell silent. He had finished. The priest affectionately patted his cheek. "Good, off you go," and the boy scampered away. "He has recited for you an old spiritual canticle, composed in these parts," my host remarked. "An old canticle?" I asked. "Is it known?" "Oh, no. If you wish, I shall translate it for you." And the old man, in a loud voice, growing animated as if delivering a sermon, threateningly raised his hand and, enunciating clearly, recited this naive and beautiful spiritual canticle, the words of which I wrote down at his dictation. Breton's spiritual canticle. Hell, hell. Do you know, sinners, what hell is? It is a fiery furnace where flame howls, a furnace beside which the fire of a forge, the fire that makes oven plates red hot, is but smoke. There you will never see light. The fire burns invisibly like a fever. Hope will never enter there, for its gates are sealed by the wrath of the Lord. Flame above your heads, flame around you. You are hungry? Eat fire. You are tormented by thirst? Drink from this river where iron and sulfur are molten. You shall weep for all eternity. Your tears will merge into a whole sea, and that sea will be to hell less than a drop of water. Your tears will only feed the flames, not quench them, and you will feel the very marrow in your bones boil. Then your heads will be severed from your shoulders, and yet you shall remain alive. Demons will play with your heads as with balls, roast your bodies on glowing coals. You will feel your flesh char, and yet you will not die. Other torments await you. You will hear reproaches, curses, blasphemies. A father will say to his son, "Be thou cursed, offspring of my flesh, for it was for you I gathered wealth by rapine." And the son will answer, "Be thou cursed, 1,000 times cursed, my father, for it was you who instilled pride in me and led me here." And a daughter will say to her mother, "Woe unto you 1,000 times, my mother! Woe unto you, vessel of vice, for you granted me freedom, and I renounced God." The mother will no longer recognize her children and will cry, "Let a curse fall upon my daughters and upon my sons, a curse upon the sons of my daughters and upon the daughters of my sons." And her shrieks will resound forever, and her torment shall have no end. And this fire, the wrath of the Lord hath kindled it, this fire, it shall burn eternally, unquenchable, smokeless, Without abating, it will penetrate to the depths of your bones. Eternity, whoa! You will never cease dying, never cease drowning in an ocean of agony. Oh, never! That word is as vast as the sea. Oh, never! How many shrieks, tears, and despair are in you? Never! How merciless you are! What fear you inspire! The old priest fell silent. Is it not truly dreadful? He asked after a pause. From afar came the ceaseless roar of waves furiously beating against the gloomy, rocky shores. I recalled the ominous, roaring abyss, full of boiling foam, the veritable abode of death, and a feeling akin to mystical terror, which makes the devout tremble, gripped my heart. At sunrise, I set off again, hoping to reach Douarnenez by nightfall. As I was searching for the customs officer's path, a man who spoke French, he had sailed for 14 years on vessels of the State Navy, approached me, and we descended together to the Bay of the Dead, bounded on one side by the Point du Raz. The view of this vast, sandy amphitheater is ineffably sad, disquieting, dreary. It instills an irresistible desire to leave, to move on. A bare valley, grown with low gorse, with a gloomy, seemingly dead lake, adjoins the sinister sandy shore. Everything here looks like the very antechamber of hell. Yellow sand stretches in a dull, even band to the long granite headland opposite the Raz, against which furious waves shatter. In the distance, we noticed 3 men standing motionless on the sand. My companions seemed surprised, for no one ever visits this grim bay. But drawing closer, we discerned that beside them lay something long, as if embedded in the coastal sand. At times they bent down, touched this object, and straightened up again. It was a dead man, a drowned sailor from Douarnenez, who had disappeared the previous week with 4 comrades. For a week they had been awaited here, where the current brings the bodies. He was the first of the 5 to arrive for the final rendezvous. But my guide was occupied with something else. Drowned men are no rarity in these parts. He led me to the dreary lake and, suggesting I lean over the water, showed me the walls of the city of Ys. They were barely distinguishable fragments of ancient stone structures. Then I drank from a spring that ran in a thin stream, according to him, the best water in the entire region. Then he told me the story of the perished city as if it had happened recently, within his grandfather's memory. A good and weak-willed king had a daughter, wicked and beautiful, so beautiful that all men who saw her lost their senses, and so wicked that she gave herself to all, then ordered her lovers killed, casting them from the summits of nearby cliffs into the sea. Her unbridled passions were, they say, more furious than the raging sea swells and more insatiable. Her body was like a hearth upon which souls were consumed, later carried off by Satan. God lost patience and revealed his will to a holy elder living in that country. The saint informed the king. He dared not punish and imprison his beloved daughter, but warned her of the Lord's wrath. She disregarded his words and, on the contrary, abandoned herself to such debauchery that the entire city, following her example, became a nest of lechery from which all shame and virtue were banished. One night, God awakened the saint to announce that the hour of retribution had come. The saint hastened to the king, the only one in the whole country who had remained virtuous. The king ordered his horse saddled, provided another for the saint, and he mounted it. A fearsome noise was heard, and the terrified riders saw the sea, raging and roaring, advancing irresistibly upon the shore. Then the king's daughter appeared at her window, crying, "My father, Will you really allow me to perish?" And the king seated her behind him on the horse and galloped away through one city gate, while the sea poured in through the others. They raced through the darkness of night, but the waves pursued them with a roar and a terrible crash. Soon the slippery foam began to lick the horses' hooves, and the holy elder said to the king, "Sire, cast your daughter from the saddle, or you will perish." And the daughter cried, "Father, Father, do not abandon me." But the saint rose in his stirrups, his voice thundered, and he proclaimed, "It is the Lord's will." Then the king pushed away the daughter who clung to him and threw her from the horse's croup. The waves immediately seized her and then receded. And the sorrowful lake in which these ruins rest. These are the waters that once flooded the defiled and destroyed city. This legend, as you see, resembles the story of Sodom adapted for ladies. The event, spoken of as if it were yesterday, occurred, it seems, in the 4th century after the birth of Christ. By evening, I arrived in Douarnenez. It is a fishing town that would be the most famous seaside resort in France, were it not so remote. The entire beauty and charm of Douarnenez lies in its bay. The town lies at its depths and seems to admire the soft, undulating outlines of the shores. Their curves are enchanting, and in the distance, the ridges of the rocks vanish into whitish blue, light and transparent mists drifting in from the sea. The next day, I departed for Quimper and spent the night already in Brest, in order to return to Paris by train at dawn. Ladies and gentlemen, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Share your impressions and thoughts in the comments. I will be happy to chat with you.